Hello, thanks for coming out. Yeah, so Allan and I prepared kind of a brief presentation on our perspective on where the technology is at across Canada from our experience. We kind of looked at we collect information from multiple sources. The main thing is our experience, so we're both working professionals. I'm involved with different projects all over Canada with my position with EllisDon, and then we've been putting on these sessions all over Canada, so we get a good cross-section of people coming out to talk about their experience in that local market. And then we also sort of draw on the membership itself and work with the committees to gather information on how we perceive the technology and how it's evolving and how it's being used. So that's kind of the gist of what we're going to talk about today. And try to include a little bit about kind of future perspective, where we think things are going and what the trends that are happening we see. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that we're all seeing that BIM, can you hear me okay? That's good. We're all seeing that BIM is different things to different people. But one of the things, as Tom mentioned, is we're very focused on seeing how it's maturing in Canada. If you look at what's being done in, particularly in Europe, the UK community, for example, has endorsed BIM, but also as part of that is they see it as an exportable industry. And so maturing their industry means that it's exportable beyond the boundaries of the UK, which means that they're going to start coming into other places, and it's the start of the next British Empire. So we have to do something at our part here in Canada, we believe, to mature collectively our industry as a whole, and that's why we're concerned, and we're always asking ourselves, where is BIM at here, and looking over the fence to other parts.
Yeah, so in this, feel free to interrupt us and ask questions and whatnot, and you got the whole board at your disposal here as we give this presentation if we feel like someone else can answer the question better than us.
So what is BIM? Well, for some people, they may say that they BIM a project. Others will say that they do BIM models in the same way they go to an ATM machine or they have a PIN number. So not to be disrespectful, but it shows that we are different things to different people. So BIM has to evolve in a way that it changes the industry. It isn't BIM itself that is any great thing. It's the fact that of the industry change and the cultural change that it brings allows us to do a lot of these things. And we're looking at it from the point of view of how does it influence every piece of the supply chain. For example, once upon a time as an architect, I just would work away myself and not worry. But now with BIM, we're finding that we have to consider the net impact on procurement, the assembly and operation of buildings. So a decision that we make as architects no longer can be made in isolation of just those things. We have to think about how it impacts the downstream and through into the operation of the building. So BIM is something that is very different. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the challenges. We're trying to create value essentially in our positions, working on projects and whatnot, and apply this new technology. And there's always a lot of misinformation that's floating around how the technology is used, how it's applied, what value is driven from that. And the key thing from my perspective is that we're all trying to collaborate better, we're trying to exchange information better, we're trying to do a better job of clarifying the projects to make sure that the project goes smoothly. So that's how I talk about BIM. It's an integrated approach to coordination.
And just one other thing on BIM, on our board, he isn't here today, but Paul Stockwell from Brownlee is a lawyer who's taken an active interest in BIM, and we've been working closely with Paul and talking to Paul. One of Paul's jobs is to kind of keep an eye out for trends that may be emerging. So a lot of the concerns around integrated project delivery, what about the intellectual property rights, who owns the model, all of those things, we're slowly beginning to see them resolved in ways, particularly around BIM being an enabler for communication. And one of the prime reasons for architects and engineers getting sued is a lack of communication. So any tool that would ostensibly increase communication is going to work in our favor. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at CanBIM, and we hope to have at our AGM, we will have a really top-notch presentation by Paul where the state of the industry is at a legal level.
So this is the agenda that we created for our presentation, but essentially we're going to go over the regional sessions a little bit, talk about what we saw by area in all the cities that we hosted these sessions. We're going to talk about a little bit about emerging best practices, things that are being created through consensus, things that are happening over and over again on projects where people are trying to implement BIM. Education and training standards and creating consistency. Software developments, how is the software evolving? What are we seeing from that perspective? And then how is all this technology being integrated with the field activities where the rubber meets the road? You want to take that one? Or?
So an industry perspective, owners and contractors are beginning to include BIM requirements. We're seeing it move up more and more. And it ranges from a mature level of BIM integration where the owners have perhaps consulted the industry, have done their research, to others who just see it as the nice, new, next shiny thing that they should have. And so simply asking for a BIM in some form isn't enough. And one of the things we've been doing, particularly through the GC committee and the designers committee that we have, is getting those things in line so that we can inform and help our industry, and to our owners committee, help them as well at the end of the day. And there's mixed levels of adoption. I'll talk from the consultant perspective, and Tom will address the GC and trades. We see everything from shared models to even hybridization. And if there's one area that constitutes the greatest amount of risk, it's projects of hybridization. So those projects where it has BIM-enabled technologies and is using traditional 2D, where somehow they're merging them has been found to be problematic. There are 2 or 3 cases where those hybridized projects have caused problems. As a consequence, we can say that BIM has been tarnished to some degree, but the BIM itself was not the root cause. So it's mixed level. A lot of it has to do with the maturity of organizations. Those organizations that have a lot of gray-haired people like me who are thinking more of retirement are less interested in engaging in this, whereas their younger staff members are wanting to get engaged. That's a factor as well, is the cultural change that comes along with it. General contractors and trades.
Yeah, so from our perspective, I mean, obviously for us to be successful, we want to coordinate every possible aspect of a project before we go to build. And we want our subcontractors to be able to participate in that process. So we're looking to our subs to be able to produce models of their scopes of work. And through discussions with the General Contractors Committee, that most of the general contractors in Canada are looking for a similar thing. So we want to integrate the consultants' work with the sub-trades work and essentially make sure that all the aspects of the project can be fully coordinated before we hit the job site. So what we've seen is that the sub-trades are at various levels of maturity in their own organizations. I mean, in some markets, we work with subcontractors that just have like a pickup truck and a couple of shovels, and then in some cases, we're working with very sophisticated entities that model all of their scope in 3D. So we have to be able to work with these subcontractors regardless of their experience level and sort of assist them to gain that experience, or assist them to partner with other firms that can fill in the blanks for them.
So Tom, what are you finding with the integration and level of adoption from a consultant perspective with what you're doing on the GC and trade side?
Yeah, there's also a big push for the consultants to actually work closely with us. I think that's been one of the nice things that's emerged out of this whole trend around BIM is, you know, the consultants want to work backwards from the field. They want to produce documentation that's fully coordinated. They want to give us information that we can carry on with, and there's sort of this holistic thing that's happening. Maybe it's, you know, in Toronto especially, there's a lot of, Ontario in general, there's a lot of P3 work that's happening. A lot of the bigger projects are going design build, so there's a tighter integration. There's a trend to go towards this integrated project delivery approach where everyone kind of works together. So there's a much more friendly environment to figure out how do we exchange information in the best way possible for the sake of the project and for the sake of the owner. One of those, and on that note, one of the things that's emerging as a standard is a BIM Execution Plan. So this is the concept of essentially getting a plan together for all these models that are going to be produced by all these different players so that all the information can dovetail together. And then obviously the long-term use of all this data for facilities management is being explored by owners, and there's different levels of interest and specifications coming out from our owner side on that topic. But the one note on all these things is that every single one is a bit of a challenge. And with the challenge, there's an opportunity, and that's one of the things we want to do as a group, as an organization, is create standards around these challenges so that the industry can refer to a certain way of doing things, so that there's consistency from project to project, regardless of where you're operating in Canada.
And that's why one of the things that we do at CanBIM is try not to write something new. If somebody has already matured some aspect in the industry, be it in Canada, transborder, or throughout the world, we would rather take that standard and work with them to mature it than to simply come up with a new standard. But around the BIM Execution Plan, I'm sure some of you have seen the Penn State BIM Execution Plan that's part of NBIMS. Very complex undertaking. So one of the things that the Designers Committee has been working on is stripping down that BIM Execution Plan to just some salient pieces that people can start with and then mature from there. But the base premise of Penn State was get something that people can talk about. And I think that's a really important industry perspective, is that we're blurring the lines between designers and producers. As we have seen over time, designers do intent and contractors do ways and means. There's been that chasm between us. But this is an opportunity now from an industry perspective to allow it to come back together. And I think this is important for Canada, who have pioneered so many aspects of construction, particularly given the diverse climate that we have. So the BIM Execution Plan is about communication and communicating intent and ways and means at the same time. And going back to the point about long-term use of the models, ownership of the model becomes a key issue. But at the end of the day, is it the BIM as we know it, as it comes out of the native file, is that what's owned? Or is it the data that is owned? What's the analytics? Who owns that, and how far does it get matured? So I think from that perspective, we're seeing a very clean movement, although it's a bit of a tug and pull at the same time.
So we, it's very difficult to pull stats on usage in Canada. We refer to some of the work that was done by McGraw-Hill in the States, and also just sort of using our own sort of judgment based on the information we have access to within the council. One of the things that we want to do as a group is do more surveys and whatnot, and that, of course, anything that we have to do takes someone to be a champion of that. So if anyone here is interested in that sort of thing, we need someone to participate in that for the council. But from our perspective, collectively, we're seeing an increase of usage across the board as time goes on. Obviously, you can look to software vendors and whatnot to ask them how many licenses of software they have released, and it's increasing all the time. And we're seeing more and more clients add specs to their scope so that they are asking for a deliverable.
So I think one of the things on this slide for a moment is quite telling, is that the industry as a whole obviously is communicating at a level that is somewhat different than they have in the past. Particularly around the fact that you see now by 2011, the last time these stats were pulled together, and I think it's much higher now, that there's been a leveling out of the uptake. So that indicates that there has to be some form of communication that's happening, and that's something that interests CanBIM very much. Obviously, the industry is going to really take off when the owners actually say, this is it. We've seen enough evidence now, we want to move forward. So I think the good thing about Canada is collectively it's getting its act together in advance of something happening like the UK BIM strategy that came out that drew a line in the sand. So I think these stats, although they're hard to read at times, I think nonetheless do tell a very compelling story.
So this map kind of indicates the locations that we've had sessions to date, and we didn't put on this map the locations that we're going to be planning on this year. So this year after Halifax, we're planning on going back to Toronto, and then I think we're slated for Winnipeg. So we're trying to get out to all the major centers in Canada to make sure that we're touching base with the membership in those areas, and collect information there, and also try to get the locals out to talk about their progress in that area. So it's been a very successful strategy, I think, to get out and create a sort of holistic approach to how we're getting the information across Canada. So Just a little bit of a recap on the sessions. We're going to try to talk about each area and talk about a little bit of what we're seeing in that area in the way of usage, how companies are using it, on a sort of from a discipline perspective, you know, across between architects, consultants, trades, general contractors, and then also from a bit of an industry perspective. So back in 2011, we had our first session in Toronto. It was pretty well attended, like 65 plus professionals came out for that session, and this was the first session that we had done. The theme of the event was collaboration and communication in BIM. We had some really good presentations from CMH2 Hill on global delivery and how they're sharing information across all their different offices using wide network accelerators, and how they're managing the development of 3D information when they have their workforce separated all over the planet. That was kind of an interesting presentation. Then we had Feature Walters talking about sort of HD BIM and the concept of you know, modeling to the nth degree for fabrication purposes. They're a sort of a specialty steel fabricator that works for Walters Steel, which is a big steel entity who also uses Tekla and whatnot, so a very sophisticated subcontractor. And then we had a roundtable with multiple Ontario-based colleges and universities, the University of Toronto, George Brown, Fanshawe, Georgian College, I think that was all of it. Anyways, we had a really good discussion around having consistency in education and how you know, the starting point of teaching people how to use these tools and processes in a consistent way will drive the industry to evolve in a consistent way. So anyways, all these presentations that were at the regional sessions are available on our website if you want to go and watch any one of them. I think they're all like between 30 and 40 minutes long, but those are sort of the topics that we tend to do, and we try to create a focus for each one of the sessions. Anyways, well, from my experience in the Toronto area, we're seeing that the subcontractors are really getting sophisticated. They're using softwares that are specific to their needs. You know, a mechanical subcontractor is not using necessarily Revit MEP. They're using a QuickBen or a TSI or an East Coast to do their modeling for their purposes. And those software packages talk to their CNC equipment and help them fabricate and create certainty around how they're going to manage their work. The general contractors in that market, because it's very busy and there's a lot of P3 work, they're becoming very integrated, where they're working with the consultants to take their information and work with the subcontractors' information and bring that together. And then I would say most of the major architectural consultant firms that are working on work that I've been exposed to at sort of the $50 million plus level are all using Revit and transitioning, not Revit or Bentley, other systems, and transitioning their firms to use the BIM software. So it's a very sophisticated market. There's stability because the work is always constant, it's not so elastic. So we're seeing the usage of that technology being adapted very rapidly. And that's been my experience, but also through working with the rest of the council and the committee at the committee level. So that's Toronto.
Our next one was Edmonton, and Edmonton featured some very interesting. It was a sort of more parochial in approach. One of the things that CanBIM encourages is that get all sizes of firms involved, particularly when we know that it's the SMEs in Canada that are the bulk of our industry. So it was good to see structural, in this case it was a designer and a producer, a fabricator, talked about the challenges of structural steel and integrating structural steel into buildings. And it helped a lot for the membership there to see two people actually standing on a platform working together that traditionally have very, very little contact. It's rare that somebody in the design community is physically going to be able to sit down with a fabricator. That's never happened. So it was an opportunity to really show with honesty some of the things that worked and what didn't work. At the same time, we had Clark Builders present at that time, before they were bought out by Turner, the medium and small size challenges for contractors with BIM. We can appreciate the EllisDons and PCLs, Canada, Leadcore, all of those have huge departments. But what about the person that, you know, it's less than 100 employees, and how do they get somebody to work with BIM when they've got to do all these other duties? And so those challenges were brought out in a way that they were posted as not necessarily as warnings, but opportunities for people to take on that challenge. At the same time, from this group, we had the Alberta Centre for Excellence in BIM emerge. And from that, the provincial government actually funded them to establish a centre, a virtual centre, which we're working with. And so it was good to see that in Edmonton, that now they have their own virtual centre that really is focusing in on how are these tools being used at this very, very subliminal level, not necessarily the broader picture, but just about Alberta. So the conclusion on this one was that we're seeing this solid development in Edmonton of the AEC community, and I think it's very reflective of the graph that Tom just showed a little while ago, that everybody is moving up at a different level. We're beginning to see integration across teams now. Contractors are working with AE teams that are familiar with BIM, and there are lessons being learned. The great thing is that everybody is sharing these lessons, and they're willing to do so, because we don't see it as degrading a competitive edge. Quite frankly, within a short period of time, BIM will be as normal as anything else. But how do we mature the industry that is a huge part of the economy within Canada to such a degree we can make it more effective, particularly when we've got diminishing resources. So it was good to see that session focus in on that. So where are they now, the current market trend? Well, if we think of that ad hoc, managed, integrated, leveraged, take the aeronautical industry and automotive industry, they've taken that model to the leveraged height. We're beginning to see it move from a managed to an integrated. They've certainly moved beyond ad hocism beginning to be solidly based in managed and now moving to integrated. So with that, we're seeing examples of projects coming out where there is small projects that have integrated project delivery attached to them without the incentivization, to large projects such as the new arena, which is happening downtown.
Yeah, so the next session we did was in Montreal, a bit of a challenge for us. Most of the boards just solely speaks English, so we had to, and we wanted to engage the local community, so we actually had translators. So some of the presentations, it was about 50-50 French-English. So again, you can go online and watch these. I think there's an English version on there. We try to pull in the local subtrades and architects. CanBIM Steel, massive steel contractor, gave a presentation on their use of Tekla, so they detail everything in 3D, and that controls their fabrication process. S&C Lavalin gave a presentation on their use of BIM and how they are running sort of an integrated process on a major P3 project in Montreal. Very interesting use there. They had many of the local consultants and subtrades working in 3D, and they were managing that process. And then the focus of the whole session was sort of BIM in practice. So how are we practically applying this for use on the project level? So NFOE Architects is a local architectural firm, EllisDon, and ETS and CADMAX, another detailing firm, had a roundtable discussion. So the use of the technology is very active in Montreal. We were very surprised by the turnout there. Very similar things are emerging there, how information is being managed, who's responsible for producing the model. So there is a trend of consistency that we're seeing regardless of where you're operating in Canada.
In Vancouver, it took a slightly different tack. I think what was very compelling were the three presentations that represented extremes. We had Ledcor talking about the UBC Science Centre and how BIM was used, recognizing that BIM was used when it was relatively immature as a software and what they were able to do at that point in time, all the way through to the smallest firm you can get, which is a one-person firm. How they were using building information modeling to leverage their industry. How were they doing it? It was interesting that one of the comments that came out of the presentation was that it is allowed for groups of small firms to share resources. So a one-person firm may not have enough work to keep a person working, or they need to have two people. So they've actually created this little community in Vancouver of BIM-enabled small firms of 1 and 2 people to leverage those capabilities to say, okay, I'm willing to pay for your staff for 2 months. When could I do it? And and they've found it's been a very, very easy way to work. As well, we had a presentation from a mechanical contractor who had got so dissatisfied with errors and emissions and problems and coordination, they literally jumped to BIM and then immediately took it to fabrication, to develop a CNC, to go out to spooling software, and showed some examples of where they saved time in reducing the amount of error by virtually creating these models and then spooling them out to a fabrication software. So then with the conclusion, again, with this area, the industry is well managed, definitely moving towards integration, and remarkably, at a small SME level, actually leveraging the technology. So 1 and 2 people firms leveraging, moving from a quick integration into leveraging. As well, we've seen that market benefit immensely from the work of one of our members, Summit, CanBIM member, who has been active in not just being a reseller, but being a person as almost a catalyst to help these various groups develop. So it's been a really good result there. Definitely moving, maturing fast in the Vancouver market, and maturing at levels that are distinctly different than anywhere else.
So Ottawa was our annual general meeting. We had, I think, a full day session there, sort of taking care of CanBIM elections and whatnot. In the afternoon, we had multiple presentations. I think we had Faro, which is a 3D surveying company, came in and demonstrated their technology. So the concept of, and I have some slides on this later in, but you know, the Faro unit is a surveying instrument that shoots a laser scan or a point cloud survey and picks up 1 million points in all directions. So that was focused on how that can connect existing conditions with this 3D process, so that you have certainty around the coordination that you're doing in the field, in the design process that'll be fully coordinated with the field. We had a presentation on Open BIM and from DNC, Defense Canada, and the integrated IBC group as well. You know, talking about Open BIM and the concept of moving towards open standards around the technology. So, you know, obviously there's multiple vendors out there that all have specific softwares. There's a trend to use IFC format to exchange all the information. And there's challenges around getting all these models as well as all the data to dovetail with each other. And, you know, as an industry, we want to move towards open formats so that we're not all hinged on one software vendor, and we want to be able to get all this information coming from all these different sources, different softwares to talk to each other to make this process work. So that's kind of a big challenge there, and a very interesting presentation on that topic. We had TMP, which is a mechanical consultant, talk about their experience using Revit MEP, specifically for design process, and the challenges around that, and the evolution of that software, and how they were able to apply that. I think on there was a Winnipeg museum. What's that?
Human Rights.
The Human Rights Project in Winnipeg, very complicated project. And that project is an example of where we had, it was PCL as a general contractor, and we had, they had, you know, structural steel, glazing, TMP's work, and multiple subcontractors all producing models and bringing all that information together. And then Intuitive provided a few case studies on what they've done in the local market there using Revit Structural, I believe, to do their detailing work for their structural work. And we had a very interesting presentation from 3D Energy on how the models can be used for energy analysis, looking at daylighting, heating and cooling, doing energy load calculations and whatnot. So, you know, there's definitely a trend to use the models for more purposes than just coordination, to do further analysis on them from an energy standpoint. And so we had good participation in Ottawa. Ottawa has traditionally been a very lump sum market, so it's the collaborative aspects that sort of integrated approach hasn't really been fostered there, I'd say up until recently. And that's probably mostly because there's a lot of government work up there and they like to go lump sum, but I think they're transitioning as well. We're starting to see more construction management, design build, integrated project delivery type projects come out of that market, so that's going to encourage more collaboration and, of course, better use of these tools for that purpose. So I'd say Ottawa was kind of an interesting transition because of that, because of the type of contracts that come out in that area. But I would say it's evolving, and I would think that it's going to be catching up with the rest of the country very quickly.
Calgary is one of our most recent ones. And the focus on this one was really about BIM and facilities management, moving away from design, the BIM 101, what's happening at an ownership and a facilities management level. So we had a presentation, Barriers to BIM Adoption, which was presented by Tony Valenti of the Edmonton Airports Authority. Tony is a CanBIM member and is on the owners committee. And he did his thesis, a master's thesis in BIM. And so he was just talking about the barriers to BIM adoption, and particularly pointing out that as long as the golden rule is the person with the gold rules, which is the owner, doesn't do the uptake, we're going to see it continuing to move along at an almost steady pace, but not have the uptake that should be expected. As well, we had a great presentation by Ecodomus on facilities management and how that is integrated within the BIM. And then the roundtable discussion was quite telling, because it was comprised of owners that are trying to get into using this and the barriers that they face. And particularly, there was an individual who was from the Calgary Board of Education pointing out that the challenge for them is the funding mechanism. Government only gives them so much money, and no matter what they do, they can't leverage capital money against operational money. There is always, I'm not sure about your government here, but in Alberta, Alberta Education gives a wad of money to Alberta Infrastructure to build schools, and then Alberta Education gives a wad of money to the boards of education to operate schools. This owner could see that if things were spent, if he could take some of that 20-year money and dump it over into his capital side, he could save himself, but that message is just not resonating. They're quite willing to continue to pay at the levels they're at. So as a consequence, these were the challenges in this roundtable discussion that came out from an owner's perspective. And Calgary was a very, very different regional session completely in its tone and its feeling.
So we spoke a little bit about the concept of a BIM execution plan earlier. There's definitely a trend on most projects where the different companies are trying to implement a strategy to use BIM to collaborate, where they sit down and say, okay, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And there are some formal documents that have been created around organizing all that information at the early stages. So typically you're looking at basic things like who's going to model what, right, and what aspects into what level of detail. LOD is level of detail. The naming conventions are obviously important. You're going to create a whole bunch of different files. You're going to exchange all this information, having all these systems named appropriately so everyone who's exchanging the information knows what it is and can recognize it. The exchange rules, how are you going to transfer all this information back and forth? Typically, with a federated approach, you need to set up some sort of online system to get the information to flow between all the consultants. There needs to be some rules around when that information is going to be exchanged. And how that model is going to be developed, so the organizational framework. So, are you going to break the models up with a vertical structure by floor, or are you going to break it up by block if it's a sprawling structure? So these things all need to be thought about, and that plan needs to be developed at the early stages. The other trend that we're seeing, especially as a general contractor, is the need to maintain a master coordination model on the job site. So, similar to maintaining a set of documents, a current set of documents in the trailer, we're maintaining a digital 3D file that represents the sum totals of all the different entities' contributions on the job site for everyone to access, and then keeping that sort of in the cloud for the sub-trades, the consultants, us to have access to. So, it's obviously the single source of truth on the project. This master model is being maintained, and it's constantly changing. So there's typically someone in charge of maintaining that information and collecting the information, checking it.
And we're seeing as well the change in the way facilities management is taking place. Traditionally, it's been a process that took place right at the very end of a project. And as a consequence of that process, how many in here would trust a set of as-built drawings if they were handed to them? Yeah. How many here would trust the information found in the O&M manuals that your owner would hand over to you? Therein lies the problem. So what we're finding as we monitor the progress across Canada is the emergence of facilities management that is enabled by BIM. There's some locations such as in Alberta, where they're actually doing COBE templating, which is Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. You can look that up on the MBIM site, where early adoption of information around model types, installation dates, warranties, and everything else gets populated into a model and then exported out to early commissioning technology, ECT, or in some instances now IBM's Maximo software works with a Revit plugin. And so you can start your actual commissioning the day you start the project. So this notion of early commissioning leading to a more fuller facilities management, at the end of the day, the material and information that's populated then becomes robust because it's being verified in a way that's unique. So model numbers, serial numbers, being able to link in data, and at the same time having a true model represent the actual condition on the site allows for people to take that over and mature it at a different level. Integrated project delivery, while this is a concept that's talked about frequently at conferences throughout the world and touted, it's growing. I think that the best way it could be described in Canada is much the same as the Apollo moon mission. You don't go for the moon mission on the first one, you take it in steps. So we're seeing the move towards integrated project delivery without the incentivization. So people are beginning to work the process, sharing information, having different cultures work around the project, having, as Tom pointed out, models available on site, involving the contractors very early on in the development of that model, maturing models around schematic design, what should it contain, what information should be there, so that the integrated project delivery ultimately will find its success in teams joined together in a joint venture arrangement, being incentivized as a whole, shared pain, shared gain. So it's going to allow for consultants to work closely with contractors to develop solutions that are driven on what is needed in the case of the project, not what is needed to protect our rear ends from litigation. So the structure around IPD contracts is very, very different. So the key ones are that you have the key consultants, the key builders, sometimes the key trades are involved as that integrated, incentivized group. And there are levels that you're incentivized at. So you will not lose money, you will break even. But then there are profit centers, opportunities to be incentivized. Early delivery of the project, budget, energy targets could be one over time that you would be rewarded after the 5th year that the building did actually perform and there weren't problems with warranties, and then you get your money instead of what we're seeing with, particularly with LEED, that now there are numerous lawsuits in the States where projects just did not achieve what the documentation said it would. So we think this is going to come. We think it's going to not eliminate traditional design bid build, but certainly will put another mix on the market, especially given the limited resources we have.
I didn't put in that AEC document. Is that put in?
I'll talk about it now. So education and training, what are we seeing? Well, through our education committee, we're working to draw academia and industry much closer together than it traditionally has in the past. So Pietro on our board, George Brown, has been very instrumental in taking this group forward and working very closely with industry, linking together institutions across the country, asking what's happening at a training level so that we can have people who have graduated can work with us. As well, we're working very closely CanBIM, as well as Building Smart Canada, with John Hale is here today. Questions on Building Smart Canada, John's here, can answer them. Working on the next version of NBIMS to help develop that. So there are ISO standards that are emerging. There's a lot of things that are occurring. And at the same time, we have taken CanBIM, we're working closely with AEC UK to develop the AEC BIM protocols. And we have ours out on the website. It's free. We encourage you to download. It is a protocol, it's not a standard. We have a number of groups that are reporting back to the Designers Committee on changes for the next version. It's an excellent document, and Canada's contribution was the legal side, the legal commentary that's in that. So it all comes down to this diagram, which I think really shows that when we talk about education, standards development, and all of these areas, we cannot act in one area without realizing we have an impact at some point, not necessarily now, but downstream to one of these other facets, be it procurement, assembly, or operation. Operation can no longer think of a process at the end of a project. It has to be integrated in with design, procurement, and assembly. In the same way, assembly can't just be a ways and means. It has to be a collaborative process.
So one of the other kind of trends that we're watching is the we have 10 minutes, right? 10 minutes. One of the other trends that we're watching is the integration between surveying equipment and other handheld devices with the field operations. So the challenge with working in a 3D environment is it's a computer-based process, right? So you can't carry a computer out to the job site very practically in all cases. So there's a trend to move that technology seamlessly from the models to a robotic total station. So you can go into the model, grab an XYZ point, for example, bring that into your total station, shoot it in the field, and then vice versa, grab those points in the field and bring it back into your model or verify. So that's one of the ways that the models are being bridged to the job site. We're also seeing software companies develop software programs for handheld devices like iPads and Android devices so that you can export your model out of their software and bring it right into your iPad and then walk the field with your model. And there's also just a general trend to move away from paper and control the documentation using Bluebeam and Acrobat and other softwares where you can actually mark up the documentation electronically versus paying for all that paper to be produced and killing all those trees. And then I mentioned earlier the concept of laser scanning point cloud surveying. So as an example of in-floor heating, so you can scan a wide area of installed systems before it gets concealed, and you pick up 1 million points that are all accurate to what's actually being constructed. Then you have that geometry to bring into your modeling process or bring into sort of a facilities management system if you want that data long term. So a very, very useful technology, and I think it has a place, especially with existing conditions or where you have to capture information as it's built and to integrate that into your long-term deliverable. And there was another example of rebar and whatnot. Is there any other trends you want to talk about?
Just in terms of the software trends, we have Autodesk as a member, and we will soon have Bentley, and we'll likely have Nemetschek. I keep plugging away at the guy in the US to join CanBIM as a vendor committee to help us understand where the technology is heading. And the best example that we can see is when electrical power was first generated, it was owners who could afford it had a little power generation on their estate and they fed power. Then it became cities that generated power for cities. Then it went out to large generation facilities that would generate for provinces and so on. The same is happening. We're going to fast reach a point where we can't accommodate the hardware on our desktop to run this. So the emergent trend is to move this software more and more out to the cloud so that you can be mobile with it, literally going out onto job sites, being at meetings, being at home, being on the road, and using the technology and the power out on the cloud, not necessarily having computing power caught inside a piece of hardware. So I think that's one of the trends that we're clearly seeing, the more move towards to this. And a staggering thought that I heard from somebody involved at Microsoft about 2 months ago in a presentation said that we may see the decline and elimination of email within a very short period of time.
That's good news.
It's good news, right? Because we're using cloud computing, we're using cloud to communicate. We have iPhones, we have instant messaging. All of those things are going to come to the mix, so we can expect the software to go in the same way.
So if anyone has any questions around any of that, or any questions for the board in general about the council, where it's going, what we're doing, or just advice on what we should focus on, just hop up to the mics.
My name's Tom Vincent, Atlantic Mechanical. We've been doing 3D drawings for some time for our own purposes, fabrication and that sort of thing, but I'm always curious on a BIM project, is there cost data to sort of be a positive to the overall business plan of doing it? And that's a sort of first question. And secondly, from an architect's point of view and a general contractor's point of view, when do you sell this? When do you recommend it? What type of projects? Is it the owner that's coming to you that's sophisticated and says, I want to do this, or is it coming back from the industry as well?
I'll speak from the design end first and then let Tom jump in. I think that as far as the business case goes, you could travel from here to St. John's, New Brunswick in two ways. You could go in a Hummer at 100 kilometers an hour, or a smart car at 100 kilometers an hour, or a hybrid. It's all about the energy that's used. The speed of time is still much the same. What I'm finding working with mechanical consultants is I'm willing to incentivize them. For example, I do not charge 20% coordination anymore. I literally put the coordination fee into a pool and say, incentivize the team to say, if we do well, and here's some targets, I want you to be looking at the model and telling me the problems you see architecturally. Don't just wait to be a mechanical consultant. And if we don't have the reduction in RFIs, the toxic RFIs, the ones that result in change orders, errors and omissions, then we'll divvy that up along the proportionate share of what the trade budget was. So if mechanical represented 35% of the overall work, then they will get 35% of that pool. I've actually found I've made money. And my consultants are much happier that they're willing to mature the models now to such a degree that when they're handed over and are used by the contractors, they know they're coordinated, consistent, complete, and accurate. So it's about incentivization. You can't have your cake and eat it. You've got to offer something up.
Yeah, regarding your first question about sort of collecting data around like ROE, return on investment, ROI. We're not collecting, like as an association, we'd love to be able to collect that information. We don't get it. We're not exposed to it. It's hard to collect, and it's difficult to measure as well because it's mostly cost avoidance. Like when you eliminate an issue from happening, you don't pay for the change order down the road, but it's difficult to calculate what the cost of that change order would have been and what the actual cost impact would have been. So we've done studies around that internally in the company that I'm in, looking at, okay, we identified 100 issues. If those had escalated to change orders and they cost $10,000 each, that would have been X amount of dollars, and we weigh that against basically the man hours, the person hours to manage that process, to collect the information, check it, find those issues, and it's always positive. It's like 10 to 1, but again, it's very difficult to measure because you don't know what the actual cost impact would have been. And from a cost perspective, to implement this as a contractor, we go to our subcontractors. We want them to be able. We work backwards in the field, so we want a document that is exactly what they're going to build in the field, so that we can compare that against the other subtrades work to make sure that all their work is 100% coordinated. And we encourage them to use the 3D technology for their own purposes, so that they can manage their own risk and manage their labor efficiently. And we don't want to pay a premium for them to coordinate their work 100%. So it's their means and methods generally on how they arrive at that result, but we encourage them to use 3D modeling for their own purposes, and they pick up systems that are appropriate for their use, that talk to their CNC equipment, that help them create their spool sheets faster. Like most of the major structural steel companies use systems that help them to automate their detailing process so they can save hours on detailing. So we're not saying to them, make a model as an academic exercise. We're saying incorporate these new improved systems so that you can improve as a contractor and increase your margins. And then from a consultant's perspective, like when we're in a design build situation, we tend to try to work with consultants that just do this naturally. If that's their standard of care, they work in a system, again, for their own purpose. They produce that model so their documentation is coordinated so they can speed up their detailing drafting process and eliminate the design coordination issues that may come back at them when they have a fixed fee for administration. So we're trying to, we're encouraging the whole industry to kind of pick up these tools for their own purposes, and then that way, they improve. We're servicing the client better, and we have more certainty over the entire process. So we generally don't charge, extra costs for this. On a CM type of agreement, we would carry staff to manage the process, but that's what we would normally do. We carry staff to manage coordination, whether you're using 3D or 2D, it's the same staff. So it's tools and staff generally the cost. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in and add to that.
Tom, I've been asked that question quite often, and I mean, one of the things that we always have to kind of compare as contractors is any big project we get, when we first get our contract, we've got project managers, we've got the leads on the job, probably 6, 7, 8 guys that are going to digest all that information and put it together and plan out the project. When you weigh out, the 4 or 5 weeks that they may be doing this and the cost of that, in the end, yeah, you do have 6, 7 guys that have the plan in their head, but when you do it in the modeling world, I mean, it becomes that glass house where everybody can participate and enrich the model, and you could have a first-year apprentice walk out on that site with his iPad, and with a couple of clicks, he knows where he is, what he needs to be doing. Even if it's just a matter of making sure the materials are in the right place, that information can come back to him quite quickly. So it is difficult to go from the traditional methodology and see the costing, but when you think of the cost that we always put into the front end, and it's not really shared as easily as it is in the modeling world, it is a tough number, but every time we talk to somebody who has embraced it, they're very pleased with the end result. It's just getting through that barrier of actually how do you become part of the process? I think that's the thing. And one of the things I've really learned is software is really kind of a side issue. Everybody can learn how to use software. It's how you learn to collaborate and share information, which the protocols are really what we're trying to develop. So.
Steve Thorne. Just wondering, do you foresee BIM models to be issued for tender purposes in the future, or is that even something that's being looked at in the UK, where they're sort of ahead on that?
From our perspective, yes. We believe that the model should be shared. Let's just get over ourselves as architects and realize we need to be in a collaborative environment. The issues become one of, is it coordinated? Is it consistent? And is it complete? And is it accurate? And there are ways and means that you can do to ensure that it is. You can also establish through a level of development matrix telling the contractor what can be used for fabrication, what cannot. Let that be your decision to make. Say you can use the walls for construction, but the doors have to be something else. So that's where we're at. I think as long as we continue to create silos where we're not prepared to share, this industry runs a very real risk of being taken over by people who are willing to do that. So begin to do it, but communicate, and don't be fearful of doing it.
Yeah, I've been exposed to a few jobs that the models were issued for pricing purposes and to manage the coordination, specifically Frank area projects where it's very complex form. So they typically issue like a wireframe structure that indicates the geometry of, the structural system, and then we use that skeleton to give to the subcontractors, and they develop the model. They put the meat on the skeleton as their submission, right? And that helps us to control the complex coordination activities around all those different elements. So like Allan indicated, they would supply a set of files that are specifically part of the contract documents, that are master files that we can use for comparison down the road for coordination purposes. And then they also supplied a set of reference 3D models to give those wireframes context. And that's a very similar approach to how the automotive aerospace industry works when they're outsourcing parts. Like if Toyota's trying to purchase a seat, they would supply the rough geometry, and maybe it's a hollow shell, and then the person or the company that's developing that seat as the product to them, they would develop all the guts and submit that for coordination purposes. Anyway, so Jerry's gonna be the cutoff marker there. So anyways, we're gonna wrap things up and move on to the next presentation, but thank you very much, and obviously if you got more questions, just approach us throughout the day. We'll be here. Thanks.